Hi guys, I'm just going to do a short endocrine lecture to get us started for Monday because we're still trying to make up for the snow day. Um, okay, so we did Roman numeral 2, which is just the basics of how the endocrine system feedback loops function, and what hormones are and those kinds of things. So on this short video, all I really want to do is get you started on the chemistry of hormones because that's like the least interesting part. It's also the easiest to understand on your own, and sort of how hormones are named. Because what I would love it if you would do is before Monday, when you get to class, I would love it if you would start working on this hormone worksheet. And this hormone worksheet is on melanieb.com, right under endocrine system notes, right here is this hormone spreadsheet. Sorry, I said worksheet. Um, Now, this is not at all the way that you have to organize your hormones, but I think I counted 35, maybe 37 different hormones that you have to learn. And for each one of them, there is, of course, the name of the hormone. Most of them also have abbreviations, and yes, you need to know both the name and the abbreviation. And then some of them have alternate names. If the alternate name is really commonly used, I put it in your notes. Then the chemical class of the hormone, which is what I'm going to do today. And then you won't be able to do these yet. I mean, I guess you could if you went all the way through your notes. But what I'd really like for you guys to get started on is these three columns. So I'm going to try to give you the background to get started on that. Just FYI, if you do this, make sure that you have it in an editable form because as we go through the notes, we will clarify some things and you'll be able to figure out, oh, no, that hormone doesn't go there, it goes here. So make sure this is editable. If you print it out and just write on it, that's fine too, but make sure it's erasable so that you can get it all done correctly. Okay, so we are going to start right here on Roman numeral 3. Really, all I want to talk about here is so we know that what hormones have in common is, of course, they go into the bloodstream to get to their target cell, and that's what makes them a hormone. But there are categories of hormones, and this is true for all chemical messengers. But I'm going to focus on hormones right now. So for all chemical messengers, they can be amino acids or amines. There's no straight amino acids that are hormones. So amines, peptides or proteins, or steroids. These three right here are the three chemical categories of hormones. So I'm going to go through sort of each one and tell you a little bit about it and why it matters, what the chemistry is like. Okay, so the reason it matters that you know the chemistry of the hormone is because lipid-soluble hormones and water-soluble hormones find their receptors on their target cells in different places. Hopefully it makes sense to you if I tell you that a water-soluble chemical messenger cannot find an intracellular receptor on its target cell. A water-soluble chemical messenger is going to have a cell membrane receptor on the surface, whereas a lipid-soluble chemical messenger can and usually does have intracellular receptors, meaning the receptor is all the way in the cytoplasm, or sometimes it's all the way in the nucleus. So that matters. And the other thing that matters as far as the chemistry of the hormone is that often when a hormone is lipid soluble, it needs an escort protein. So the way that it's secreted from the secretory cell, I'm going to get to in just a second. But what I want to tell you is that if I'm trying to get this lipid soluble or hydrophobic chemical messenger hormone, let's say from point A to point B, it diffuses straight into the bloodstream, but it also diffuses straight out long before it gets to the target cell. So quite often what happens is it needs an escort. And this escort protein, which I use instead of carrier protein because carrier protein means a membrane transport protein to me. So this escort protein right here Makes it temporarily not lipid soluble so that you can effectively carry it from, for instance, let's say this was an ovarian cell all the way to the brain, like if it was estrogen and it's lipid soluble. So if you don't bind it to this escort protein, then it just diffuses straight out. So that matters. A transport protein or escort protein is often required to get them through circulation, whereas a water-soluble chemical messenger goes straight into the blood plasma and it pretty much stays in the blood plasma until you get to a location where either it has a means of getting out, like porous capillary, or a transport protein to get it out. So this one needs an escort or else it will not get from point A to point B. And then the other thing that's important is that lipid-soluble chemical messengers tend to last longer in the bloodstream. They have what we call a longer half-life, meaning that I would need to make cortisol, a lipid-soluble hormone, less frequently, and it would last longer than I would need to make growth hormone, which is a water-soluble hormone. So the chemistry matters in that way. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the chemistry of these hormones. So the hormones under this column right here, chemical class of hormones, you are going to have 3 possibilities and then one little sub possibility. The possibilities are going to be, again, back to here, they are going to be steroids, peptides and proteins I'm going to put together. And then there are 2 different forms of amines. There's a lipid-soluble amine and a water-soluble amine. So down this column, every single hormone is either going to be a peptide, a steroid, a lipid-soluble amine, or a water-soluble amine. Okay, so 4 possibilities really. Okay, so let's look at the amine hormones first. The amine hormones are about the size of an amino acid and they're derived from amino acids. So remind you what an amino acid looks like. It has this carboxyl group and an amine group, and then the R group right here is variable. And you don't have to memorize these or anything. Just look at what they have in common with one another and then look at the variable group right here. So amine hormones, we're going to run into those. There's not that many of them. Most of these hormones end in INE. If something ends in INE, it is pretty much telling you that it is made of an amino acid or derived from an amino acid. That means it's going to be important to be able to spell them. So for instance, epinephrine, norepinephrine, are actually epinephrine and norepinephrine, but that's not how we pronounce them here. And then dopamine. Please note that all 3 of those end in INE. That's telling you that they are amines. So these are relatively small hormones, meaning that if you were motivated to do so, you could count the atoms, okay? And they're stored until they're secreted. And here is an example, the 3 that I just gave you. So here's an amino acid called tyrosine. And please note that dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, all of these function at least sometimes as hormones. They're all very similar to tyrosine. They're derived from tyrosine. They're also really similar to one another. So sometimes there's just an extra group on them, right? Or something taken off to make it, you got an extra group here. So these 3 are all really similar structurally to one another. So those 3, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, all fit into the category of water-soluble amines. And then you're also going to have 2 lipid-soluble amines. And then these are the only 2 lipid-soluble amines that you are going to learn. And they are the 2 lipid-soluble amines called the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. We will go through their names sort of slowly when we do the thyroid. But T3, I want to tell you the long name so you can hear what's in it. T3 is triiodothyronine. Triiodothyronine. The INE tells you that it's an amine. The thyro tells you where it comes from. And triiodo means that there are actually 3 iodines to make it. And then T4 is tetraiodothyronine. Those are both water-soluble amines. and T4 requires 4 iodines, comes from the thyroid, and is an amine. So that's all the amine hormones. So basically those 5 are going to be your amine hormones, 3 water-soluble ones and 2 lipid-soluble ones. Okay. And then the biggest category of hormones, as far as like most things fit into this category, are what we call the peptide or protein hormones. And peptides or proteins are anywhere between 3 amino acids linked by peptide bonds up to 20 amino acids linked by peptide bonds. And peptides are water soluble, so that's the answer to that. And since they're water soluble, where are they going to find their receptor on the target cell? Their receptor must be a cell membrane receptor, not an intracellular receptor. And where would these be made in the secretory cell, the cell that makes them? So since what they are is peptides or proteins that are meant for secretion, let's put this back together with 1610 and tell you that basically what we are going to do is we are going to make these on the rough ER. There's some processing that goes on, but then what we are going to do is we're going to take that, we're going to package it up in the Golgi apparatus, and then, especially as it gets larger, the mechanism of release is going to have to be exocytosis as it gets larger. That's because it's relatively large and water soluble. So this, for instance, could be insulin being related from being secreted from a pancreatic beta cell. Okay, so these are made and stored in the cells for release by exocytosis because of their size. And any hormone that ends in IN, not INE, INE is an amine. If it ends in IN, it is a peptide. Although, I apologize, but not all peptides do end in IN, but everything that ends in IN is a peptide. For instance, oxytocin, that's a peptide. Somatostatin is a peptide. Insulin is a peptide. These don't adhere to the rules. They're still peptides, okay? But if it does end in IN, it is a peptide. If it ends in INE, it is an amine. So, and the peptide hormones, you guys probably remember a little bit, but basically we have strings of amino acids linked together by peptide bonds, okay? And then you can have different layers of folding. You don't usually get into that much folding when they're only 20 amino acids long, or not complex folding anyway. So the peptide hormones include hormones from the following organs. So every hypothalamus hormone, there are 7 of them. Every hypothalamus hormone except for dopamine, which is an amine, all of the other 6 are peptide hormones. And then the posterior pituitary secretes 2 hormones called ADH and oxytocin. Both of those are peptides. The pancreas secretes 3 hormones, insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. Those are both peptides. The parathyroid gland secretes PTH, which is a peptide. And most of the hormones from the anterior pituitary. I only say most because we don't learn all of the anterior pituitary hormones. We learned 6 of them because there are a couple more, but nobody really understands what they do very well, so I don't teach them to you. So I should say for this, the 6 anterior pituitary hormones that you learn all are peptides. And then these other organs, there are a lot of other organs that secrete hormones that we don't concentrate on, but they're most likely to be peptides. Just FYI, when you look at this table, so you are responsible for all of this, but the other endocrine organs down here, I don't test over those yet. I just put them here because we will learn more hormones as we go through the rest of the semester, and you'll have a place to put them. But basically, all of this is stuff that it's going to be in your notes. So it's not like you have to go look for it anywhere else. This is just a place to organize it. Not every single hormone has a clinical significance. So again, you're just responsible for the clinical significances in your notes, okay? But you will have all of this filled out, all of these, okay? And then you'll have some of those filled out, and then you're not responsible for this bottom portion, at least not right now. Okay, so that is your peptide or protein hormones. And then the last category of hormones are the steroid hormones. And the steroid hormones are the word steroid means that they are lipid soluble and they are derived from cholesterol. So here's the typical steroid ring structure, and you can see the atoms if you're interested in them. Here is cholesterol, and here is, for instance, testosterone, which is one of your steroid hormones. And so what all of your steroid hormones have in common is that they're lipid soluble and derived from cholesterol. They're not all sex hormones, but a lot of them are. So I'm not going to hold you responsible for memorizing this. I just want you to see it. So here's cholesterol, which is, of course, this guy right here. And cholesterol is the nutrient molecule, you also make it, from which all of these steroid hormones are derived. All of these blue ones right here are collectively called the androgens, and those are the sort of male sex hormones. Not that women don't have them, but male have a higher concentration of these, typically speaking. And then these are the estrogens. Estrogens are the female sex hormones, and again, men have some estrogens as well. And they're in pink, blue, pink. And there's progesterone, which is also a female hormone, but it's not derived from the same lineage as these guys right here. So that's progesterone. And then these three right here are in green. Those are in approximately the same concentration in both sexes. So they're in green, paint the baby's room blue, red. If you don't know the sex of the baby, you paint it green. So these are cortisol and corticosterone and aldosterone. These are all of these in the colors are steroid hormones. They are all lipid soluble and derived from cholesterol. So they are not stored. Hopefully it makes sense to you that it would be relatively difficult to store a lipid soluble hormone. So when you make a lipid soluble hormone, it's generally just secreted by diffusion. So they're not stored. They immediately leave the cell, and they will diffuse directly through the cell membrane. So there's no special secretory mechanism for them. And they generally bind to intracellular receptors. And the primary places that release steroid hormones are the adrenal cortex. And these guys come from the adrenal cortex right here. Okay. In addition, some of these do as well. We'll get to that later. The ovaries and the testes, which are collectively called the gonads, and then the placenta and the kidney. We don't study those two yet. So what you call the ones that come from the adrenal cortex, steroids that come from the adrenal cortex, are called corticosteroids, or sometimes people pronounce it corticosteroids. And they include all of these green ones, and then a little bit of these two right here, but don't worry about that yet. We'll get to it later. And then the gonadal steroids are the ones that come mostly from the gonads, like estrogens, progesterone, and androgens. Okay, but regardless, those are all steroid hormones, all of those, and they are lipid soluble and derived from cholesterol. So the assignment that I put in here is fill in the column titled chemical class of hormone on your hormone table. And again, there are only 4 possible answers for each hormone. And I'll tell you where to get the hormone names in just a second. For every hormone, it will either be a water-soluble amine, a lipid-soluble amine, a peptide, or a steroid. And some of them I put in there for you just to get you started to make it a little easier for you. Okay. So as far as hormone transport in the blood, that's what we already covered. We already said that if you are a water-soluble hormone, quite often you need an escort when you're traveling through the bloodstream. And they call those carrier proteins there, but I don't like to use that term that way. You can if you want to. Okay, so the next thing that I want to tell you is I want to talk a little bit about hormone naming, and then tell you sort of how to get the little table assignment, the spreadsheet assignment done. I would love it if you had that done on Monday. It would make your life and mine quite a bit easier. So I won't be quizzing on this stuff immediately, but it is a lot to learn. This is kind of the most memorization you have to do in physiology. So getting it started sooner is better than later. Okay, so first off, let's just rummage through your notes just a little bit and say, okay, so what I went back and did just the other day, because I thought I was going to do this and it would make it easier for you to find. The actual hormone names are in blue now. So the hypothalamus hormones are going to be in blue, but these two actually don't go with the hypothalamus. They're made in the hypothalamus, but they're secreted elsewhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that those don't go under hypothalamus. They will go under posterior pituitary. Okay, but these 7 right here, okay, those all go under hypothalamus, all 7 of them, and whatever the heck order you want to put in them, it doesn't make any difference. If there is an alternate name, you're going to have to know it. The long hormone name you're going to have to know. And then the chemical class of the hormone you should be able to do today as well, because I told you that all of the hypothalamus hormones, except for dopamine, are peptides, right? And you'll do the same thing with the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary is right here. It's going to secrete 6 that you need to know. You're going to fill all of those in, and let me make that blue too, because that's actually the long name of it. Okay. So you're going to do that for all of these hormones. And I think I counted 35, maybe 36. I can't remember. So all of those you're going to be able to do. But I want to give you a little guidance on how hormones are named so that you won't be as confused as I was when I tried to understand this. So and we'll go back and pick this up at the beginning of the lecture, and we'll reinforce it as we go through the lecture. So if you run into a hormone, and you will, that has the suffix tropic or tropin, like thyrotropin, that means target. So if it's thyrotropin, it's telling you that the thyroid is the target, okay? And so let me show you an example. Start with this one. Okay. All right. So do you see this one right here? So this feedback loop we'll learn really quickly. Not this time, we'll learn it, but I'm just going to show it to you. So the hypothalamus secretes a hormone that goes to the anterior pituitary, and then the anterior pituitary secretes a hormone that goes to the thyroid, right? And then the thyroid secretes these hormones that go all over the place. But please note this one right here. This hormone is called thyroid stimulating hormone, or thyrotropin, because it's going to the thyroid, okay? So thyrotropin tells you where it's going. It doesn't tell you where it came from, but you will remember that very quickly. Okay, so thyroid stimulating hormone, or thyrotropin. The only thing that makes that really confusing is that you can also have releasing hormones. So let's back up just a little bit and look at this. So this guy right here is not thyrotropin. It's thyrotropin-releasing hormone. So what this one is going to do is it's going to cause the release of thyrotropin-releasing hormone, causes the release of a hormone that's headed to the thyroid. So when you put releasing or inhibiting in there, it's one step back. So let's do this one more time. This one right here is going to the thyroid, so that's a thyrotropin. But this one right here is a thyrotropin-releasing hormone. So what it's going to do is it's going to cause the release of a hormone that is headed to the thyroid. When you put this releasing, it backs up a step. So thyrotropin-releasing hormone causes the release of a hormone that's headed to the thyroid. Thyrotropin heads to the thyroid, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Let's do another example. Okay, so this one right here, okay. So it's a complicated feedback loop. We will learn it. It's not as hard as it looks initially. There's a lot more detail than you need in here. But the first thing that I want to show you is this is a hormone that comes from the hypothalamus, and it's headed to the anterior pituitary. It's called GnRH. Its long name, this is part of the reason you need to learn the long names, it's gonadotropin-releasing hormone. But it's not headed to the gonads. What it's going to do is it's going to cause the release of a gonadotropin, which is headed to the gonads. These two right here, FSH and LH, are gonadotropins, and they're headed to the gonads. So the gonadotropin-releasing hormone causes the release of gonadotropins that are headed to the gonads. Let's check this one more time. Thyrotropin-Releasing Hormone causes the release of a thyrotropin that's headed to the thyroid. Okay, so we will reinforce that as we go through. I just want you guys to see it and get used to it. One of the reasons that you do not get to memorize just TRH or just TSH is because there's so much information that's actually in the long names that actually helps you to retain it instead of trying to remember or memorize just what TRH stands for and that it's different than what TSH stands for. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and record this, and then my hope and expectation for Monday is that you will have this column and this column when necessary. That won't have something filled in for every blank, and this column, which will be filled in. So this entire column and that entire column will be filled in, and this one will have alternate names. Again, I'm going to reinforce, if I didn't write an alternate name in the notes, assume you don't have to know one, okay? The same thing will be true over here if I didn't write a clinical significance in the notes. Now, for now, you do not have to do these 3 columns because we'll do those as we go through, right? Every single day during lecture as we finish the hormones, and we'll probably have 2 hormone lectures, maybe 3, then you will get information to fill in the rest of this table. And then the table will basically be sort of a more organized way to look at all of the information in one sheet instead of in 20 different pages. Okay, I hope you guys have a good week.